This is another edition of Pens Down. The pen is the tool of the journalist. On this show, journalists are no longer the reporters or presenters. They are the newsmakers. That is why we call it Pens Down. This is where they drop their pens and then make the news themselves. We lead you into the inner workings of journalists and get you to understand all that they go through, which never get reported with the news. Today, I have the company of the co-founder and editor-in-chief of Bars Times Nigeria, Mr. Tony Ademiluyi. His full profile will be shown to you on the screen while we go on with this conversation. Thanks for joining me, sir, and welcome to Pens Down.
I'm very glad to be here. Thank you very much for inviting me.
You're welcome. How did you end up in journalism? How did you discover the journalist in you?
Well, I'll say it was hereditary.
Okay.
My dad, Mr. Ademiluyi, is a veteran journalist. He edited a defunct newspaper at the age of 29.
Okay.
One of the youngest editors in Nigeria at the time. In 1983, to be precise.
Okay.
Yeah. The name of the paper was called Democrats.
Okay.
You know, it was a very popular paper in Nigeria in the 1980s. You know, and like a masterstroke, my dad used the paper to campaign against the Ghana must go policy.
Okay.
Which so many Ghanaians expelled from Nigeria. You know,
yeah.
Pardon me for going back to historical times. Yeah. So I'm the firstborn of my father. You know, and it was my duty to buy papers every morning.
Okay.
Yeah. So I started buying newspapers at the age of 8 years old.
Okay.
You know, and then after I buy the papers, I got curious to what them. You know, yeah. So I'll read the papers after buying the papers, and then I got hooked. You know, but because my dad was prominent as a journalist, I wanted to be my own man. You know, so I didn't want to. I felt if I chose journalism, I'll forever be in the shadow. So like I said, when I got into the university to study law, I knew that law wasn't for me because I'm a very creative person, and law doesn't give room for creativity. You know, so I studied law for 2 years and I got bored. Yeah, I got bored and I dropped out of my law program, and I ended up studying English. I really wanted to study mass communication or journalism, but at my university, other universities in Nigeria have journalism or mass communication under the Faculty of Arts.
Okay.
But at the University of Lagos, where I attended, mass communication was under the Faculty of Social Sciences.
Okay.
You know, yeah. And then there was an embargo placed on transfer of students from law to social sciences.
Okay.
So I could only transfer from law to arts. Yeah. So the only courses that appealed to me in the arts were English and history.
Okay.
You know, I didn't really like philosophy. I loved the philosophy, but not strong enough to want to study as a standalone course. So I ended up doing English and then doing my minor in history. Yeah. Okay. So that was how I got into journalism. So when I was in the university, I started to write for freelance for some papers.
Okay.
Most notably these day newspapers, which is arguably I use the word arguably the most influential newspaper in Nigeria. You know. Okay. I also began to freelance for Punch and a few other papers while I was in university, both writing opinion pieces or op-eds as they're fondly called, and doing stories for them as well. You know, I started doing that when I was on the verge of English. I've left law now. I've switched to English department now. Yeah. So when I left university, there's something called the National Youth Service Corps in Nigeria.
Yes.
I don't know. It's a 1-year program that you serve the government compulsorily. Yeah.
In Ghana, we call it national service.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, okay, fine. So I did mine in Shell, in a town called Warri. Warri in Delta State. Warri is an oil-rich town.
Yeah.
I wanted to do my service in the media department, but there was no space at the time. So I did it in human resources, you know. Yeah. My being in human resources exposed me to the leadership of Shell. And then and then I saw the oil spillage in Shell. That Shell was allegedly accused of engaging in oil spillage in towns in Delta State and River State. Okay. So that kind of fueled my interest in journalism, to use journalism as a tool to fight for injustice. Yeah. So after the youth service,
what would you say stands out as the most challenging assignments in your journalism career so far?
Yes, my most outstanding assignment has been, okay, like I've covered the politics, business, culture, and the health bits.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes.
My most challenging assignment has been the politics bit, because most politicians see the press as enemies. So it's very challenging getting politicians to speak freely to the press. Most times, politicians tend to open up to the press in Nigeria. I don't know how it obtains in Ghana and other African countries, but most times in Nigeria, they open up to the press only when it's time for elections. You know, so they use the press to do lots of propagandist work. You know, and they don't even do it themselves. They use their aides or their spokesmen, you know, to do this propagandist work for on their behalf, you know, with the media. So my most challenging assignment has been using Nigeria has what they call the Freedom of Information Act, Freedom of Information, FOI Act. It was a bill for a long time. It then became an act. The challenge is getting politicians getting information from the public that is of public interest using that act. You know, it's usually very difficult to get information in this part of the world because there seems to be a lot of secrecy in Nigeria. How many practice journalism in Nigeria? So I can't speak for other African countries, unfortunately. But the major challenge I face in journalism has been covering the politics beats and then using the FOI Act to get them to talk. Most politicians love to keep things secret. I mean, it was just yesterday that the news broke, for instance, in Nigeria, that the Central Bank of Nigeria did not publish its audited account for 7 years, which is a criminal offense. You know, yeah. So the problem has been using the FOI Act to get information off the policymakers, politicians, and the decision makers. Yeah.
Okay. Let's talk about social media. How many years have you been in journalism? When did you start?
I've been in journalism actively since 2013. So that was a decade now. That's 10 years now. Because my first job after youth service was in an NGO. That wasn't journalism, though it was communication work. And except you want me to count my freelance when I was undergraduate, which I don't want to count. So active journalism, I've said straight 10 years. Yeah.
Okay. How has social media changed the face of journalism for you?
Oh, it has changed the face of it has changed the dynamic, it has changed the economics. Prior to the advent of social media, the media houses were the gatekeepers. Okay? So the journalists had that sole right of gatekeeping, of information gatekeeping. But when social media came, the concept of citizen journalism rose. So anybody with a smartphone and data can pass up as a journalist. I mean, we all saw that if you remember the celebrated case of George Floyd in the US.
Black Lives Matter.
George Floyd, the Black American, was murdered by Derek Chauvin.
Yes.
Black Lives Matter, yes. It was a 17-year-old girl that recorded it. She was not a journalist. So the dynamics has changed. Number one, the economics. How do I mean by the economics? The advertising revenue is now in the hands of a duopoly of Google and Facebook. Google and Facebook now control the advertising revenue. Well, even in the likes of New York Times, Washington Post, and the CNN and BBC, they don't come close in terms of advertising revenue. And we all know that the founders of this Google and Facebook are not journalists. They are tech guys. You know, so the social media has kind of encroached on the economics of having a media house anywhere in the world. The social media has encroached on the traditional gatekeeping of journalism.
Okay.
So anybody can report news now. Okay. And then that has affected the demand for journalism because many media houses now have shut down jobs. They now use freelancers or stringers, as they call them in journalism. Okay. Yeah. So it has changed the dynamics in terms of the economy. So that many media houses now, even the New York Times, they've gone under a paywall. What a paywall means is they charge for some aspect of their news. and stories. Relying on advertising is no longer sustainable, unlike how it used to be before. Let me even say something interesting. I worked for a consulting firm prior to my full-time foray into journalism after my university days. And my then boss, Mr. Bolagunju, used to say something to us that Facebook is the biggest social media network in the world, but they don't create content. So that got me thinking. I said, wow, yes, because the content is created by the users.
Yeah.
So social media created a concept called user-generated content. That is the user that create the content, not the journalist. You know? Yeah. So so the job of a journalist now, because of social media, is not like a endangered species. So journalists have to be on top of their game to stay relevant. You know. And then what else did I want to say? The Washington Post, which is America's second biggest paper after the New York Times, was established in the 19th century. Okay. Now, when they sold 100% of their equity to Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon, former world's richest man, they sold it for $250 million. Now, consider these things very carefully. Instagram was barely 3 years old when Facebook acquired them for $1 billion.
Yeah.
YouTube was barely 1 year old when Google acquired them for $1 billion. WhatsApp was barely 5 years old when Facebook acquired them for $19.3 billion. LinkedIn was barely 7 years old when Microsoft acquired them for $26.5 billion. What am I trying to say? That social media platforms are even more valuable than the traditional media platforms. You know, because of, so social media has really disrupted journalism. Let me leave it at that.
Does journalism pay? You've been here for 10 years. Does it pay?
Yeah. To be honest, in terms of the financial, it doesn't. I'm going to be very frank. Except you want to be corrupt, or maybe you're lucky to. In fact, the only three ways to be financially comfortable as a journalist in Nigeria. I'm speaking for Nigeria now. I don't know how it obtains in Ghana and other African nations. The first way is to be corrupt. I don't subscribe to corruption, that's blackmail, killing of stories, bribe, brown envelopes, and so on. The second way is to work for any of the international media houses on a full-time basis, like Reuters, Thomson Reuters, Bloomberg, Wall Street Journal, Doswell, BBC, CNN, or any of the Pan-African publications like the Africa Report, New African, and so on. Then the third way is to be a media entrepreneur, you know, and maybe to have a lucky break. Someone like Ikeji, for example, you can't really call her a journalist. She's a blogger.
Yes.
And she's made no pretense about that. She's not a journalist. But she, I would say, is one of the richest bloggers in Nigeria. People that I'll describe as journalists, entrepreneurs who are financially comfortable are the duo of Chude Gideon and Deborah Williams, you know. But their money comes from PR, not even from journalism. Even though they have journalism platforms called the Red Media Africa, you know, most prominent of which is by Nigeria, their money comes from public relations, not from journalism. You know? Yeah. And then you have a few platforms that are run, even Legit is from Ukraine, not even from Nigeria. Pulse is from Switzerland, you know. So there is no called Nairametrics. I heard that the guy is quite comfortable, but he's not even a journalist. He's a chartered accountant. He just delved into business journalism. So it's, for me personally, I've not made money off journalism, but I won't call myself a failure. I still have dreams to still make money off it. I'm tired of being a labor of love. I think it's high time. Having spent 10 years in the profession, I think it's high time to monetize, you know, to monetize my labor of love, as they fondly call it. Yeah. Because I mean, I want my reward to be on earth and not in heaven, if you get my drift.
Now, quick one. Yeah. You've done 10 years. If we are to go back into time, 15 years, are you still going to choose journalism?
Well, to be honest, yes, I would. Despite the fact that I'm not wealthy, I'm far from even being financially comfortable. I'll still choose journalism because it gives me a kind of fulfillment I've not experienced in any other profession. But like I told you, when I did my youth service, I was in human resources. So I think out for a while of pursuing a career in HR as it's fondly called or shortly called. But I think HR is kind of straight-jacketed. There's little room for creativity. The thing with me is that I'm a creative soul. Okay. Yeah. So the only profession that resonates with my creativity is journalism. For instance, if you have to write a story, it's creativity. The questions that you're going to ask your sources is creative. If you have to write an opinion piece, it's creativity. The angle or the perspective you're going to take is creative. You know, if you have to take an analytical position on any issue, it's creativity. So journalism and writing are the only professions that make me express that creative side of me, to be honest. I've worked for an NGO in research and communications. I've worked for a human resources firm. Apart from Shell that I did my youth service in the human resources department, I still work for a consulting firm that their major revenue earner was HR. Even though I earn more I need some time, okay, but it was giving me a kind of satisfaction no profession has really given to me. So I think to answer your question, yes, I'll choose it over and over again. But the thing I'll do, I'll let the business of it, because in every profession under the sun, you have the job of it and the business of it. So you have the job of journalism and you have the business of journalism. The reason why many Nigerian journalists are poor is that they're so passionate about the job of journalism that they neglect or they fail to learn the business. So if you ask me, going back to time, 15 years to go back to time, the only thing I'll do differently is I'll learn the business aspect of journalism. That's the only thing I'll do differently. But as for doing journalism, I'll still do it again. Yeah.
Let's talk about the brown envelope. What's your take?
Okay. Yeah, the brown envelope ideally is not good. Okay. But we need to look at the circumstances which fills the brown envelope. The reason why people take brown envelope is most media houses in Nigeria don't pay salaries at all. They owe them for 5 months, a year. In fact, there was a media house that I worked for, owned by a politician. I don't want to mention his name, a very popular politician. I don't even want to give a clue so that, you know, yeah, but they've not paid salaries for 2 years. So how do you survive as a family man without being paid salary? Even as a bachelor, how do you survive without being paid salaries? You know, so the reason why is that the salary are not being paid. Then there is job insecurity. Journalism is about profession in Nigeria. I'm speaking for Nigeria now. That there's no pension plan. It's only as recent as 2004 that the then administration of General Chief Olusegun Obasanjo as president introduced the contributory pension scheme for all workers in Nigeria. So the media was also, but unfortunately, many media owners criminally don't remit these pensions to the pension fund administrators. So a journalist is sacked or retires maybe at 60. Some journalists can't even retire at 60, which is the statutory retirement age in Nigeria. Some journalists are even working at 75, at 80. You know, maybe in consulting capacity, some even in full-time capacity, because they're going to retire into poverty. Now, their pension, normally, how it works in Nigeria is that the contributory pension scheme is some part of your salary is deducted and put in your pension fund, and then your employer puts some money from the profit of the company in your pension fund. Yeah. Now, not only in some companies or some newspapers or media houses, not only do you have the criminal practice of these funds not being remitted, some media houses don't even put their own share. So the reason why there's a lot of brown envelopes is that that's the only way for survival. I mean, you don't expect the journalists to take up arms against the state or to take up guns against the banks. How do they survive? In as much as it's condemnable, you know, well, I've been lucky personally not to be old salaries. I'm one of the very few journalists in Nigeria. I'm lucky. It's not because I'm the most brilliant. I'll just say I'm just privileged in that sense, not to be old salaries. Maybe I might have done worse because a hungry man is an angry man. Because the old adage. But to be honest, it's a very bad practice. It's very bad. And I think that the government and the Nigerian Union of Journalists, NUJ, should hold the government to account and should blacklist media houses by shutting them down, like how they do in the developed world. A media house that cannot pay salaries has no business being in business. I'm sorry to say. Yeah.
What are your golden memories these 10 years?
Sorry?
What are your golden memories these 10 years?
Okay, yeah, okay. My golden memories are the fact that some of my stories have cost, I've actually made a change, especially when I reported in the health sector. You know, I was privileged. I've reported extensively in the health sector, and you know, health issues in Nigeria is very, very. We have a lot of health issues in Nigeria. There's a crisis on our hands now. You know, there's the Japa syndrome. Japa is a Yoruba word for permanently relocating abroad.
Yeah.
So many health workers are relocating abroad. You know, many health workers are traveling abroad. Nurses, medical doctors, pharmacists, medical labs, laboratories, and so on. So I've done stories on schools that don't have toilets. You know, I've done stories, and because of my stories, these schools have toilets. You know, I've done stories on hospitals that didn't even have electricity supply at all. You know, that they have to use candles, which could cause a fire outbreak.
Yeah.
To have light when women go into labor. You know, I've done stories of hospitals situated near the forest, whereby you have reptiles like snakes crawling into the hospital. So some of my stories I've been able to, hold the government to account. So when I see my stories being read, even though yes, I've never been a fan of awards. Okay. For personal, I mean awards are subjective and prejudicial. Yeah. But I'm satisfied at the impact of my little stories can make, especially in the health sector.
Now let me put you on the spot. These 10 years,
Okay.
have you ever been approached with anything financial or material to compromise the details of any story you were doing and take it? I'm talking bribery here.
Yes, I have several times. To be honest, I mean, I'm going to be brutally frank. I've been approached because I've been privileged to work for big newspapers. Before I went independent 3 months ago. Okay. So I've been approached in all the business, except the culture bit, because culture is not really seen as a serious kind of endeavor in this part of the world. But when I covered politics, business, and health, okay, I was approached by some powerful interests to kill stories, not to pursue stories, But I've been lucky to have editors that have stood by me, that have ensured that every story that I've been worth my salt has seen the light of day.
How many more years do you want to go before you drop your pen?
To be honest, I think what I'm fighting for now is financial liberty. In the sense that I've been getting some offers. Okay, this journalism is not paying you.
Yeah.
Why don't you come and work in the corporate affairs department of the company? So that you can earn some decent amount of money. You can buy a house. You can drive a decent SUV and so on. So those temptations to leave journalism are there, and they're real. They're real because I get some offers from time to time. But to be honest, if I had my way, as I say, goes, man proposes, but God disposes. If I had my way, only death will do me part with journalism. Yeah, but I'm trying to fight for the financial, for the economic side, because I mean, Tom Martin said something that you cannot save the world if you cannot pay your rent. Yeah. So once I can settle my financials, I think to answer your question is until I go 6 feet below. Yeah.
Politicians and political actors are increasingly setting up and owning media houses. Classic example, the sitting president of Nigeria is the owner of the Nation newspaper and TVC television.
And Radio Continental as well.
Yes.
There's a radio station.
Political ownership of the media. Are we sitting on a time bomb? Is there a reason to be worried? Is there a cause for concern?
Yeah, well, to answer this question, thank God for the advent of the new media. Thank God for the advent of social media. Thank God for the advent of the internet. Thank God for the liberalization of the telecommunication sector globally. Now, the political ownership of newspapers, yes, even for these four revolutionary, things that happened to mankind, which is the ethos of the fourth industrial revolution, we should have been worried because they will control the narrative 100% or completely. Because they have the money, where we are going to be forced to thrive like a big brother state. If you did a bit of history, how life was in the defunct Soviet Union, when you had the Iron Curtain, when you had the first concept of Big Brother, But because of the fact that the media have been liberalized due to social media and the internet, there are emerging voices. These days, you can get ground to do stories. So you don't even have to be a full-time journalist to make a decent living. These days, you have many freelance journalists. You have many freelance journalists. You have many journalists that own their own media houses as businessmen. You have many journalists who leave journalism full-time, like me, and set up media houses. It would have been impossible, for instance, for me to have boss times if it was in the 1980s or in the 1990s when there was no internet. Because how do I get money to set up a printing press? How do I get money to run it for 2 or 3 years before it becomes profitable? And don't forget that the adverts is controlled by a cartel. But this day, thank God for Google. I have a friend that he's not even a journalist. In fact, he's not even a graduate. His English is even an apology. But guess what? He makes about $5,000 a month from Google AdSense. So Google, last year, Google alone paid out $13 billion to content creators, both on blogs and on YouTube channels. So that has broken the monopoly that the corporate world had over adverts. So I would say I would say to wrap off or to round off, I would say prior to the internet age, it's a big cause for grave concern. But because of the internet age, and then you have the fact that journalism is built on public trust. Okay, the public trusts the independent media more than the national media owned by the politicians for obvious reasons. I don't need to state the obvious here.
My final question: should journalists be licensed?
Wow. This is a very tricky one. It's a very tricky one, because funny enough, I asked the former Nigerian bureau chief of Reuters this same question in an indirect way, not in a direct way like you put it to me now. Okay? Yeah. The truth of the matter is, I asked him a question. I said, sir, you studied mass communication at the university. Some other journalists who are journalists said studying mass communication is a waste of time. Now, journalism is a calling. If you are born as a journalist, you don't learn it. You know what I'm saying? I'm just trying to answer your question, by going into specific a bit. So part of it will take a bit more longer time.
Yes.
So the point is, journalism is about the most open profession in the world. Anybody who has a phone and data can pass off as a journalist. So to answer your question, I think journalism, because of the advent of fake news, that's the only reason. Because of the advent of fake news that is very dangerous, I think journalists should be licensed. But this is how it should work. You don't necessarily have to study mass comm. Not necessarily. But every journalist should belong. Like in Nigeria now, we have a guild called the Nigerian Union of Journalists, NUJ. I think for the purposes of fighting quackery and fake news, especially in this type of social media where anybody can have a blog or a social media channel, every journalist, both traditional and new, should be licensed. Now the difference is it shouldn't be like you are paying fees like the other professions. Because of the peculiarity of journalism. The reason is this: most journalists struggle to eke out a living.
Yes.
So asking them to pay fees can be a bit stifling of the media. Because I've always been an advocate of free press, even during the military regime. But there should be some kind of licensing, even if it's a one-off fee.
Are you looking at it? Are you looking at it in the form of well-organized peer review, which keeps every professional on their toes?
Of course, even in the academia, you have journals that are peer reviewed. Yes, so why shouldn't the work of the important and non-work of journalism be peer reviewed? Why shouldn't your contemporaries criticize your work? You know, so like I said, I'm an advocate of licensing, but it shouldn't be done with a commercial slant to it, because that way it's going to stifle the press, because not many journalists make a decent living off journalism. So yes, there should be licensing to an extent, maybe a one-off fee, something that's very minimal. And then there should be checks and balances. Okay, I mean, there should be something like an ombudsman, you know, that okay, the members of the public who are not journalists can report the extortionate activities or the corrupt activities of journalists to this ombudsman, and then journalists should be disciplined. Just like the way you have, I mean, when Bill Clinton was found guilty of perjury, even though he apologized and he was saved from impeachment by the U.S. Senate, the bar of Arkansas, when he was suspended him for 5 years. So there should be sanctions for every journalist as well. That's where the licensing comes in. But it shouldn't be like, oh, if you don't pay your licensing fees in 2 years, then you can be banned. That way, there's going to be stifling of the media.
Is there no downside where possibly politicians will screen themselves behind the licensing body or the body in charge, and then use it as a score-settling measure, especially against journalists who are known to have an adversarial brand of journalism, the one that shakes the bile of the great and good in the society?
I agree with you totally. But like I said, I'm looking at it from the perspective of fake news. Because fake news is even more dangerous than the deleterious activities of corrupt and inept politicians. Okay? And that's the reason why Thomas Jefferson, the 10th president of the US, said, if I were to choose between a government without newspapers or a newspaper without government, I'll go for newspaper without government. I mean, if he made that statement in the 19th century, that shows how important journalism is. Yes, I know that politicians can be funny, especially since they own many media houses, you know, but there's still a way to be checkmated. Because after all, come to think of it, you have human rights lawyers, for instance, but law is regulated, law is licensed. How are the lawyers able to get it right, despite the fact that in Nigeria, many politicians have been able to infiltrate the justice system? Many politicians have been able to allegedly bribe judges. Let me be careful with my choice of words now. They've been known to bribe judges. Okay, so but the Nigerian Bar Association, the body that controls the lawyers in Nigeria, still hasn't managed to get it right. So I think the journalists, the Nigerian Union of Journalists, has a lot to learn from the NBA, because the thing is, lawyers and journalists work hand in hand to make the society better. You know, but the lawyers are able to get it right. Why shouldn't it be the same for the journalists?
Tony Ademiluyi is co-founder and editor-in-chief of Bars Times Nigeria. He's been my guest today on PENSDOWN. Thank you very much, sir, for your time. I'm truly grateful for your company today. Very exciting conversation by every man. Deep perspective and issues that have been dealt with so roundly. This has been PENSDOWN. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back again with another colleague the next time, and we'll still be talking about their journalism journey. Bye for now.